Hello, class. Uh, I decided to go ahead and make a video to finish out lesson two, mainly so that I can give you a little bit more, I don't know, context to this lesson as you begin to, if you have not written your reflection already, to help you think about your reflection more with some thoughts. So. Yeah, the reflection is kind of it's a little abstract, and I wanted to give some context. So finishing out the lecture, I think, would be helpful. The reflection, of course, is due on Wednesday night before we meet next. So I thought this was important. Um, if you've done your reflection already, if you want to rewrite it after watching this, then you're welcome to, and I will accept late reflections because of the unusual timing of all of this. We're going to get caught up after this chapter, after this lesson, lesson two. I think lesson three we'll be back. We'll kind of hit our stride and stay on target. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen and go off into the PowerPoint and finish up where we left off. Okay, so we were getting right. We talked about the structures, the big structures of culture today, talking about the one example being the feminist movement and how it evolved in our society and Western society from the right to vote, um, leading up to the right to vote and on forward after that, after 1920. Um, and so what we're going to talk about now is seeing small, which is definitely connected to seeing the larger structures of culture. But seeing small is getting into understanding the rationalization and understanding the logic behind what other cultures do, including our own culture. Um, your textbook, Professor West talks a lot about Papua New Guinea and the Nkalaman, and how they use witchcraft in their culture, and how is it important? It's important to build relationships and to heal wounds, right, that were caused by relationships. So it's a great example of how witchcraft is beyond what we consider from the Western perspective of hocus pocus and um, and yeah, so some would say nonsense, but other cultures would consider our religious practice nonsense. So anyway, witchcraft is practiced throughout the world, actually, and that's something that when we talk about seeing small, um, the Tayedis of Kenya, they use witchcraft as a way to, similarly to the Kalaman, to prevent relationships from from breaking, from to actually prevent and not to actually, like what we do is when relationships um, uh, when when breaks happen in relationships, we deal with it afterwards. They try to they try to deal with it before, and looking at how witchcraft is something that is a source of anger, unresolved anger. In other words, what we call passive aggressiveness, things that we hold on to that we haven't dealt with and that come out in sometimes passive ways. So yeah, just different words for some things that we experience ourselves. The Azande, another group that's very small culture. In Africa that and I've read and watched some documentary footage on the Zande. They practice Catholicism as well as witchcraft. It's kind of one of these examples where you have two different religions coexisting with each other and fusing together. Um, but Zande, if an Zande a person goes into a hut, a house, and the hut or house collapses because of the bamboo was being eaten by insects, and that person gets hurt or dies because of that collapsed hut. Um, they will often point to witchcraft. They'll understand that there were ants or there were some sort of insects that were eating the hut, the infrastructure of it, but they'll say, you know what? Actually, why was it this person walked into the hut in the moment that it was going to fall? We call that bad luck. The Azande call that witchcraft. And so, yes, again, things that cannot be explained are often put off to um, witchcraft. Sickness is another example. Navajo Native Americans practice witchcraft throughout various Native American traditions. Navajo look at witches as being people who are misbehaving, that are acting against the norms. So it acts as in a sense of a social control. So if you're not acting right, you could be accused of witchcraft. And so it's a way to make to keep things cohesive, to keep their culture cohesive, keep relationships together. Anyway, so this is thinking small. This is seeing the small. This is getting understanding the logic and the reasoning behind what people do. And that's um, anyway. So let's look at our small culture. Let's look at from a small lens. Excuse me, from a small lens, our culture. And we talked about the structure and the value of individuality and how that plays out in the various structures of our society. Um, and so let's look at one element that has been evolving since the 1950s and how screen culture, the screen culture has come into be to bear on our relationships. Um, there's been tons of books that have dealt with that looking at the screen culture and how it has influenced our relationships. Um, and of course, from the outsider's perspective, if you don't have TV in your life, then amount of time we spend in front of the screen would seem pretty illogical, pretty crazy. Um, there was a writer in the 1980s by the name Neil Postman who was a humorist, philosopher, looked at TV land as being just a wasteland. At the time, we're talking about three pre-1980s. He was looking at the 1950s as far as how it started and how it had an influence on the family and on relationships. But he summarized TV land and the so at the time there were only three channels in the 1950s and 60s, and those three channels were very similar, very monotone as far as what was being presented. And so the storytelling changed. Who was talking to who? If you weren't on TV, then you weren't that important. Of course, this gets heightened when we get into the 1980s and in TV land. So, but what was being presented on TV, um, Postman says, is irrelevant. It's entertainment. It's not important. Most of what is on TV is not important. We're watching stories being told to us, whether it's news, whether it's commercials, whether it's movies, sitcoms. It's for us to pacify ourselves. He also says that it's incoherent. We're getting a barrage of different messages from different angles that do not have a coherent message necessarily. Of course, if you can paste together your messages today in a nice succinct package, then you can find coherence, and that is another problem in itself, the echo chamber that we live in. Um, and it's also impotent. It's impotent. And that when we watch TV, it doesn't inspire us to go out and do anything about it. We see stories of wars and people dying of famine and hunger, and it doesn't really propel any change to what we see because we are being entertained by them. And so Neil Postman thinks this is, of course, he's trying to warn. This is back in the 1980s. He writes this, he's warning us what's to come. What is to come? Well, the MTV world is to come, which is the um, cable TV, which now is becoming kind of irrelevant a little bit, but still hanging on. Um, and our stories, the storytelling at this time really becomes fragmented. The channels are some people can pay for cable, and it's got over a couple hundred channels. So really fragmented in that our experience of reality, individual reality, is being sliced up more and more. Um, and one of the things that we can look at as anthropologists is language. And when TV came in, um, language started to change. Um, and so one specific word has been diagnosed through TV to be sort of the meaning of it has shifted, and that is the word whatever. Pre 1960s, the word whatever meant that is not what I meant. I It is whatever, that is whatever. I'm not really talking about that. It is whatever something else is. So that was pre 1960s, whatever. 1960s, of course, we start to see the TV come in, and the hippie movement, or um, uh, the anti-establishment movement came in, and this was the evolution of the word whatever to mean whatever, man. It's kind of like discarding um, uh, the establishment and saying, you're just telling me a bunch of lies, whatever. Just go ahead and keep talking the BS. I'm not even listening to you, basically. So it was a countercultural takeover of that word. 1990s, whatever went to meaning indifference. I don't really care, and I'm indifferent to the world. Meh is what the new word for whatever it's become. In that 1990s, meh, M-E-H, was really made famous by a particular show that was on TV. Um, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this or not, but this little episode, this is a 10-second little clip of Simpsons. They find it in their vocabulary here.
Kids, where would you like to go to? Blockoland! Meh. But the TV gave me the impression that
We said meh. M-E-H. Meh.
So, yeah, so meh really took off and took over whatever, but whatever's still around. And meh is there, but whatever is definitely now becoming what we would say is I will do whatever I want to do. This is the me generation of our time. Um, this indifference has now become I'll do what I want to do. I'll do me. You do you, I do me. It's one of the things I hear from my girls all the time is, and it's just, and I even find myself referencing it. It's you do you and I do me, and it's as long as we're doing our thing that we find important, that's what's important. Well, so this has led to a self-esteem issue. The 1950s, a survey was made of people, of college students. 12% of the people in the 1950s believed in the statement, I'm an important person. Okay, it's 1950s. This is the World War II generation. A lot of self-sacrifice. This is not the me generation, to say the least. The 1980s, 80% say that I'm an important person. That number has grown ever since. 70% of college freshmen say that they are above average in intelligence. 70%. It's an extraordinary number of people who think that they are above average intelligence. There's this self-inflation of our perspective of ourselves. Um, so this notion of, man, I'll do whatever I want, is something that it's really there's something in the water in our culture, and um, we're getting into trying to we're trying to figure that out. And so there's been plenty of books that have kind of diagnosed this phenomenon. Um, and this one book, I think it was 2004, Generation Me, looks at the millennial generation, and you know she makes some pretty. She's made actually recently, or a couple years ago, she made an updated version of this and revised a little bit of it, but hasn't really shifted her thesis from this. Um, she says that the youth generation is quote unquote confident, entitled, and miserable. Never been. This is the most extreme generation that we can say this about. The baby boom generation was a little bit of this. They were more overly confident, more self-absorbed too. But the miserable and the depression is something that Generation Me is something that's really kind of um, it's a new phenomenon we haven't seen. Anxiety generation, the millennial generation, is very anxious, very anxious. I'm a Generation X myself, but the boomers and the Xers like myself, this book is a great insight um, to the millennial generation. 25-year-olds are the depression and the suicide of people going into their 20s is at a higher rate than it's been, in recorded recent history. 85% of college students are more anxious than students of the 1950s. So yes, Generation Me is something to check out if you're interested in for it's an easy read too, a quick read. So other things to consider here. What's happening with this Generation Me, and of course we're talking about Generation Y as well. We are collectively, we think that we are extraordinary in our intelligence, that we are um, beyond average, but we are collectively average. If 70% of us think that we are above average, then collectively we think that we're above average. But as a matter of fact, the collective is average. But on social media, we present ourselves with having glamorous lives of, we only show the good side of our lives. And this article that was written, I think it's turned into a book. It looks at, it's called the Instagram effect. And it talks about the story of Madison Halloran, who was at Penn State or Penn University. And she was a star athlete, track athlete, and she was on Instagram all the time. She took pictures after pictures of everything she was doing. And she took a picture, her last picture she took was right before she committed suicide. Um, and so, yes, what this article and what other articles and other research has shown that what the world of social media, Instagram, it has a way of glorifying our image but there's a lot of misery inside. And what we're doing is we're looking at people's wonderful pictures and images of what they're doing that seems so great, and we're comparing our insides to their outside, their external image that is not real. It's not real. It's we are all editing our images to present what is the good side of us. So this dynamic is something that obviously is new, and it's the depression and the suicide. There's some associations that are being shown, links. So another book worth checking out, Charles Taylor's Ethics of Authenticity, and he is looking at the search for the self and what the search for the self, this self search. We're going to talk more about this later in the semester. How it leads to this sort of fragmentation of our culture. We are always, there's this always sort of course, this you do you and I do me, this sort of thing of self-absorption and self-looking for oneself. We become self-centered, and modes of importance or all our sense of importance becomes heightened because we are so looking at ourselves, um, and that disengages us from others. We don't feel responsible for others. There's this growth of apathy that happens, um, and the splintering of connection to others also gets accentuated. We have no common horizon with people. We do not, therefore, share the same values with many folks. Um, so it's really the search for the self. We'll come back to, like I said, in later semester. But this is all very much. This is 1991 when this was written. This is very much well related to the Generation Me and the other the other articles we just talked about. So the outcome is a decline in empathy over the last 40 years. Um, so what we are also doing is losing trust in each other. This is Peter White, BBC reporter. I think he was born in 1947, so he's in his late 70s, mid 70s. And he has been reporting for the BBC for decades, and he's been traveling the world for decades. He has done great feats like crossing a desert with a team on foot, and I think somewhere in, I think it's Kenya, Eastern Northern Africa, um, and he has just done amazing things, learned how to ride bicycle. We're going to talk about another blind person later in the semester who also rides a bicycle and goes hiking and is very independent. Well, this guy is very independent. He does rely upon guides, and he'll trust, complete strangers to help him out. And so I bring Peter White up to present sort of the what what used to be this belief in each other and trust in each other. Today, what the dynamic? This is a book that was written in the 1990s, Coddling of American Mind. It's had new versions since then, but this book, the two authors, Haidt and Lukianoff, they are looking at how in the 1990s, parents really started to coddle their kids, and to this day, this is still the umbrella parent is still at large, and to the point where we are doing these kind of things with our kids. We're putting them on leashes, and the fear of their safety is something that is just it's having an impact on the amount of exploration that they'll do in life. Each generation explores 1/9 of the same physical space as the previous generation. This has been heightened and extended with how we're treating, and what, really, we can trace this back. 1990s, there was a big crime. There was an increase in crime, but it was heightened by the media and politicians. Um, the crack epidemic and the fear of the street drugs really accentuated the fear of parents and their kids. Um, so that is something just is carried forward. Um, so the way we coddle and protect, we don't allow people to go out and fail, and to learn through pain and rejection. Pain and rejection are a natural consequence to living, and we want to protect folks, to protect kids in particular from that experience. We want to protect ourselves. But without pain and rejection, really, there's no such thing as really joy. Joy is something that is really, you need it's counter to give it value. Um, and so, this is, sure, you can, this is something. You don't always have to have pain to be able to get joy, but really, it gives the pleasures of our world much more value when you don't have it all the time. Um, so so yes, and then we bring in screen culture. Um, and we often use screens as a way to pacify ourselves and to screen ourselves off from other people, from relationships that, you know, from pain and rejection. Screens are part of, as you could say, a drug, definitely. But Brené Brown, who's a um, self-help guru, professor, writer. She writes, "We are the most addicted, medicated, obese, in debt, and busy adult cohort in human history. We are numbing ourselves, and you cannot numb emotions selectively. So, so screens help numb us to not only our own pain, but to the pain of others. As we started this talking about that with Neil Postman in the 1950s, his 1980s, what he wrote. Um, so yeah, all this to say is that in education, we looked at this earlier today, um, and you come to college looking for answers. We pose questions to you, and sometimes we give you information that conflicts with each other, with what you're looking for, and we often give you ambiguous responses, and it sometimes sends students back in their corner of not wanting to pursue pursue education or knowledge for themselves. And it's a scary moment whenever you're told something that is ambiguous and that is not black and white. Um, but the whole process is about creating a culture of wonder and to explore, and to play, a culture of play. And that's, well, I think that we've lost play in our culture. Um, the world of play is something that, we in anthropology we romanticize hunter and gatherers quite a bit. And one of the things we do romanticize is their culture of play. Many indigenous populations had that built into their culture before they were infiltrated with Western values and practices. But kids were had their own world of, and you could say, in not just indigenous tribes and populations, but here in, I know that I had more play time than my kids do. Um, but play is something that we learn from. Play is a amazing, valuable experience, that we're removing ourselves from. If you ever seen two dogs play, one small and one big dog, you realize that they're both are actually, the big dog could really dominate the small one, but there is a sense of responsibility. The big dog makes sure that the small dog doesn't get hurt in their play. It can look pretty rough. I got two dogs next door, and I've seen this dynamic, but animals know how to play with each other, to the point where they're not hurting each other, but they have an ownership that they're playing something, a game, and they're both responsible for it. And so it's something, it creates play, creates connections with others. Um, it creates trust. There is definitely in theater, the different exercises we do in theater to create trust is about learning how to play with each other, really. Um, it's 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 a way we take chances. We can experiment with each other and with ourselves in this world of play. It's how we innovate. It's how we get new ideas about things. It is it elevates this world of the wonder, and that's what I'm trying to bring to bear on us, that we need more of this in our culture. Um, so